Representative Crenshaw, welcome. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here. Ms. Franson, I'd like to start with you. You pointed to China as a leader in renewable energy investment. They've also asked that we help fund their transition to green energy. My question is, should we do that?
Thank you. China has been supportive of the U.S. providing international climate finance in accordance with our commitment under the Paris Agreement. That funding is particularly necessary for vulnerable and poor countries for a combination of mitigation and increasingly.
I understand that it may be necessary for a combination of poor countries, but would it be necessary for China? It's not a trick question.
Well, we need to continue providing that finance and increase that finance in accordance with our obligation under the Paris Agreement.
Sure. Well, I hope China's never a recipient of that. I mean, you've mentioned them multiple times as a leader in renewable energy, saying multiple times that they have invested at least double the amount the U.S. has in renewable investments. If you're impressed by that, you'll be very impressed with what they've invested in coal. In 2020, China built 3 times more new coal capacity than the entire world combined. It's the equivalent of 1 new large coal plant per week. That's on top of the 73 gigawatts of new coal capacity that's planned, but not completed yet. So they're not going to COP26, and they should not be hailed as some leader in climate policy. Ms. Franson, changing the subject, you mentioned in your testimony that the United States needs to drastically reduce the rate of deforestation. Really no disagreement there. I'm not so sure that we have a high rate of deforestation. You didn't cite where you got that number, but that's not important. I think we all want net more trees. So let's agree on that. But what we might not agree on is who we should be hailing as leaders throughout the world. Many of the countries you mention as leaders in the climate space, they burn trees for electricity in order to meet their climate goals. The EU uses biofuels for 45% of its quote unquote renewable mix. Do you think the United States should follow suit? Do you think we should be speaking out against these countries that use wood burning as a way to make their renewable energy mix sound better?
Yeah, thank you for raising that. There are certainly problematic uses of biofuels throughout the world. Not all biofuels are sustainable, and not all forms of biofuels can be a robust part of our climate change solution. And that's why we need to be investing in other forms of clean renewable energy like wind and solar. We also need to bear in mind that biofuel production can come into competition with conserving forests for carbon sequestration and biodiversity. And that's the form of biofuels that we need to avoid. So absolutely, we should call that out.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. I would also note that CO2 emissions for wood burning are 2.5 times higher than natural gas. We should not be clapping our hands for our European partners that like to burn biofuels instead of just going to clean natural gas that's produced in the U.S. I would also note that natural gas produced by the United States is 41% less emissions on a life cycle basis than gas produced in Russia. And yet our administration plus the Europeans are doing everything they can to rely on Russian natural gas instead. I find that to be very frustrating. Another frustration I might have is, because I have many, we have countries like Uganda, they're begging for more natural gas. They're telling the Western world that they won't be trapped in this generational poverty because of the less obsession with only solar and wind solutions. There's a company in my district that is trying to build an LNG import terminal in Vietnam. The LNG terminal would allow them to wean off of Chinese coal, which is 3 times the emissions profile of US natural gas. Now in Vietnam, their population density is 800 people per square mile. So a solar farm displaces quite a few people. It's not really feasible for them. So they're asking for cleaner energy that actually works for them. Wind doesn't work for them because offshore is closer to Chinese waters. And yet the Biden administration is refusing to permit this. It's refusing to allow this because our policy is not to help fund any kind of projects, fossil fuel projects abroad. But of course, this is just going to lead to higher emissions, much like many of these policies will end up net leading to higher emissions. It's worth noting that if all OECD countries right now stopped burning fossil fuels, stopped emitting any carbon dioxide whatsoever, all of them right now for the next 100 years, we would only reduce the temperature by 2100 by 0.8 degrees Fahrenheit. It's quite a huge cost for almost no benefit whatsoever. I only point that out to get us back to some kind of rational thinking when it comes to a cost-benefit analysis and how we might look for better solutions that reduce emissions, because I think we all have the same goal there, but do so in a more pragmatic way. Thank you. I yield back.